Good morning, everyone. It's so good to see all of you. My name is Malcolm Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral. It's so good to have you all here in person. We're welcoming all the people who are online, too. It is time, says Jim Wallis, to call out genuine faith, specifically the Christian in White Christian Nationalism, inviting all who can be persuaded to reject and help dismantle a false gospel that propagates white supremacy and autocracy. We need to raise up the faith of all of us and help those who are oblivious, stuck, and captive to the ideology and idolatry that is leading us to great danger. When we see a civic promotion of fear, hate, and violence, we need a civic faith of love, healing, and hope to defeat it. And that must involve all of us, religious or not. Learning to practice a politics of neighborly love will be central to the future of democracy in America. The Reverend Jim Wallis is the inaugural holder of the chair in Faith and Justice in the McCourt School of Public Policy, founding director of the Georgetown University Center on Faith and Justice, and New York Times bestselling author. His latest book is The False White Gospel, Rejecting Christian Nationalism, Reclaiming True Faith, and Refounding Democracy. We just received news that this book will be debuting on the New York Times bestseller list at the 4th spot, which is which is remarkable for a book about Christian faith and politics. You know, when Mark wrote the first gospel, it didn't even do so well when it first began. It took a while before it really got its momentum. Today we're going to be talking about 6 iconic texts at the heart of the genuine biblical faith and what it means about Jesus. And it's time for us to ask anew, do we believe these teachings or not? Jim, thanks so much for joining us today. We're so grateful to see you.
It's been 12 cities in 2 weeks, and this is my last stop. So I love this city. I love Grace Cathedral, so I'm really glad to be here today. For lots of reasons, I'm glad to be here and going home late tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously you travel without being in touch with me every single time, but the last time we saw you here was in 2019, I think.
Yeah.
And so much has changed since then.
Yeah, for sure.
I just think of, we were just talking about COVID and the effect of the pandemic on us. But I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about your first impressions of the January 6th insurrection. Where were you? What were you thinking? What did it look like to you then? And how has your perspective on it changed today?
Good question. Joy and I were at home, normal day, and then this came on the news. Jesus suffered identity theft on January 6th.
That's so true. Yeah.
Because those who stormed the Capitol violently were holding Confederate flags and Jesus flags. And when they took over the Senate floor, they shouted Jesus' name in their prayers. So what we're trying to do now is bring Jesus back. Now, every revival movement in the history of the church, every Catholic order that formed, they're always trying to get us back to Jesus. And so upstairs we'll talk about how Easter is not just a day for us, but it's a season. And so this is an Easter book. It's about resistance and hope at the same time. And so we go through these passages, and I love the text for today. It says, and then his disciples opened their mind to the scriptures. I'm hoping this book is a little catalyst to open our minds to what the scriptures say and help Jesus get his identity back in this nation at this time. So identity theft.
I've had my identity stolen before, but it wasn't so serious as what just happened to Jesus. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just the history of white Christian nationalism. You described it in your book as being a new, a different kind of form of white supremacy that we've seen throughout the history of the United States.
Yeah.
Where did it come from, and how is it changing?
Well, the name spells the problem. So you take the most inclusive, inviting, welcoming message in the world, and it becomes white. And then Christian, but it doesn't mean service and sacrifice and
Discipleship.
and love. It means dominion,
Yeah.
control. And you and I know the old dominionist theology. This is new. It's long back in our history. So this theology, this false religion, undergirds the ideology of white supremacy. And then nationalist. I'm getting older now, but I wasn't there for the ascension of Jesus. But I have read about it. And what happens there is Jesus tells his followers, go into all the world, making disciples of every nation, teaching them to observe whatever I've commanded you. Nationalist, really? And so we have a candidate who is selling a nationalist Bible, which we haven't seen before, for his own financial gain, to pay his legal fees. So I want to say, all right, what does that Bible say? What does the Bible say? Let's go back to that. But this is an old idolatrous theology. Idolatry, big word, I know, but we're in a cathedral, so we can say those words. It's false worship. That's what it means. The false worship of a nation. When you put the documents of one nation in a Bible, this is the false worship of a nation. So how do we get back? How do we become Bible-believing Christians again? Is really what I'm trying to ask all over the country.
Yeah, and that's a great question. It's so important to get back to the truth of Jesus' teachings and Jesus' message. You know, you address so many different people in your book. I wonder what advice you can give to us. I mean, many of us, go home to Thanksgiving. We meet with neighbors who have very different opinions of things. How do we? What is your advice for talking with people who disagree or may not see the truth of the disconnection between Jesus' message and current preachings about white Christian nationalism?
Thomas Merton once said, everything is about relationships. And I think that's true, good or ill. And so at Grace, today I'm going to probably meet people who are concerned about what's going on, worried about what's going on. But most of you, and today in the cathedral, have relationships with people, friends, family, congregants, other places, who we want to talk to, and we're afraid to, and don't know how to. So the book is trying to provide some help, particularly finding common places and common spaces. If we say we're Christian, what does that mean? And what does that mean now? We won't win this by partisan politics, by offering our media instead of theirs. It's going to have to be a relationship built on what we have in common. So at Georgetown, I always have a class before my students go away for Thanksgiving break and have to have Thanksgiving dinner with crazy Uncle George and Mom and Dad. And instead of saying, you're wrong and I'm right, they've got to say, okay, we're Christian if they share a Christian faith. Here's how I'm growing. Here's how I'm learning. Here's what I'm hearing. Here's what I'm feeling. Most parents want to know what their kids are going through. So let's talk about that, and then let's have a conversation. And Brittany Packnett, who's a wonderful Black Lives Matter activist, was in Georgetown just 2 weeks ago, talking to my class about policing. That was our topic. And she's an amazing police reform advocate. Well, Brittany, and I met her in the streets of Ferguson. That's where we first met a long time ago. And she says, if you want to join us in the streets and with rubber bullets and tear gas and life-threatening moments, you're welcome, But the bigger risk for white people is to talk to their friends and family, their relationships. That's the bigger risk. So I went to the demonstration. Well, the bigger risk is to bring this home. So in the next several months, we're going to have conversations across all those boundaries. And most of us have relationships across these boundaries.
You know, when I was a young boy, it just seemed like the American religious scene wasn't so politicized. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just how that happened, how denominations like the Southern Baptists, et cetera, have changed, as a result of kind of a new orientation toward politics.
Well, it is the politicizing, and in his comment for the book, Gary Will said, the use of religion for hate is blasphemy. It's a big word, but I think it's true.
Yeah.
And so I talk in the book about how it was a political takeover of evangelicalism, my tradition, a political takeover. In the 1980s, we started out in the early 70s, and the big story was young evangelicals are changing evangelicalism. They're bringing a social gospel to the personal faith. And it was all positive, but then these, literally, and I tell the story, these far-right political operatives, one of them's named Richard Viguerie. He was the direct mail guru of his day. And he boasted this to me. He told me himself. So we went to people like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson. We said, give us your lists, and we'll make you household words in America. Wow. And that's how they did the moral majority. Yeah, that's how they created.
Well, beginning with those mailing lists from
those big TV preachers. So this was a political takeover. So we can't respond with our own political. I say, don't go right, don't go left, go deeper. How do we go deeper and go back to what we say we believe? So I'm wrestling throughout this book with these iconic passages. And so the first part is what's wrong with white Christian nationalism. But then I go on these texts, and these are texts that you and I know and have preached from, but I wanted to revisit them and reframe them and refresh them for this new moment here. And it's been just, for me, praying through them, wrestling through them. What did Howard Thurman say about this parable?
Right. I love that part of it. And it made me think. I was just kind of fantasizing as I was reading the book, and I was wondering if you could speak to one of the four writers of the Gospels, or if you could speak to Paul. I mean, who would you speak to, and what would you talk to them about?
Oh, so many things. Well, let's take the whole chapter on the Good Samaritan.
Right.
Okay. So here's a lawyer coming to talk to Jesus. What you don't know from the text, but I've learned, it's a Washington lawyer. I know that tone of voice. Okay, Jesus, so what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? Jesus says, well, I think you know the answer to that. You love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, who is my neighbor? Not who is my neighbor, but exactly who do I need to, how do I get out of obligations here? So Jesus picks as his, well, let me tell you a story. He gives an example of who he thinks a neighbor is, and he picks a Samaritan. Now, the Judean audience to which he was speaking didn't think there were any good Samaritans. They were half-breeds, mixed race. They were false worshipers. They were coming across the Mexican border in cartels with disease. And no, that's the other people. But they're being othered like immigrants are being othered today. So here's one who's being othered by Judean culture, a Samaritan. And he stops along the side of the road for a man all the Jewish scholars say was a Jew. So here's an other stopping to help one who is other to him. Now think about that. That's a transforming idea. And the question he asked, who is my neighbor, is the most important question for a multiracial democracy going forward. That's the question. It's right there in the text.
Yeah. Yeah, in one of the sections of the book, you're talking about Heather McGhee's work, and you described how she has this idea that in America, we care so much about our in-group well-being that even if something good happens to the out-group, we don't want the good thing to happen to the out-group. You wrote it, so you understand what I mean. I don't know if you get what I'm saying. But you'd rather not have anything good happen to those guys, even if it doesn't have any effect on you. And I was wondering, I wonder how much that insight is linked to our income inequality, our wealth inequality in the United States. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that.
Heather McGhee's book, I make my students read it in class. It's called The Sum of Us. Everything is a zero-sum game.
Right.
If you gain, I lose. If another tribe gets helped, it hurts my tribe. And she shows that's just not true. Yeah. And she's an economist who has found her way to this notion of how it's about the sum of us, not pieces of us, who are tribes who just want to win by others losing. But that's our mindset. We're used to that. Income inequality, and so, she's not a religious person, but we've got to talk about these things. And it's like the text, another text in the book is my conversion text, Matthew 25. I call it the "it was me" text. I was hungry. I was that mom who has 3 jobs and still needs food stamps, and they're being cut. That was me.
Yeah.
I was thirsty. I was that mother in Flint, Michigan, who couldn't get clean water without asbestos to her kids when it would suffer brain damage.
Yeah. The
white mothers in the suburbs, they're doing fine. That was me. I was naked, a stranger. The word stranger in the text means, literally means immigrant, right? And so here I am in Guatemala. My land can't grow food because of climate change, and they want, these armed groups come and want my boy to be a boy soldier. And if I don't let them have my boy, they're threatening to rape my daughter. So I gather up my stuff I can carry naked, and I walk 2,000 miles with my family, because in America, they'll take us in. That's what we heard. And they put us in cages and put my kids in different cages and deported them. Jesus says, that was me. I was in those cages. I was sick and in prison. And then they say, when do we see you, Lord? Hungry, thirsty, naked, sick, an immigrant in prison. He says, well, as you've done to the least of these, you've done to me. And they said, we didn't know, if we'd known it was you, we would have formed at least a social action committee in the church. So to me, that text opens things up. And Heather and I have talked about that text. And it means there's always room, there's always space. And if we go to the edges of society, and you've got you on the West Coast, I've been in Portland now this week, and Seattle, and here, and you've got all these people, homeless people on the streets, people without housing, people with all kinds of issues. And the truth is, getting us all included is the best thing ultimately, not just for them, but for all of us. And so Heather tries to lay this out as an economist, but there's real gospel lessons here.
Yeah, definitely. There definitely are. Before we went on, we were talking a little bit about the upcoming election. You mentioned Cornel West and just parenthetically in the book. What do you think about third-party candidates and in this election and in general?
Irresponsible, including my friend Cornel West. Irresponsible. It's not about who the best candidate is. It's not lesser of two evils. This election is a test of both democracy and faith. Biggest test of democracy since Civil War. And now a test of our faith communities. What are we going to say? What are we going to do? How are we going to stand up or not? And a new generation, like the students I teach at Georgetown, best part of my week every week, they're watching us. They're watching us.
Yeah.
What are faith communities going to say and do in this election? And a lot of my students, a little quiz for Grace here. What's the fastest growing denomination in the country?
They're pretty
Always
smart.
get it right. None of the aboves. They check the box. None of the aboves. Okay. So when I went to Georgetown full time about 2 years ago, I was speaking one day and I said, I just love the nuns, you know. And this Catholic sister says, we love you too. And I said, well, I love the NUNS nuns. In fact, when I went out, way back in the day when I went out to speak from the New Sojourners and conservative Christian colleges, there'd be 2 rows of sisters in the chapel, the auditorium, full garb. Yeah. And I'd say, sisters, why are you here? Well, we're local, Jim. I said, I figured that, but why here? Jim, this is a very conservative place. And we thought somebody should have your back. So I had nuns as bodyguards for years, you know. But the NONES, this is not a secular movement. Most believe in God or something bigger than themselves. What they're looking for is authenticity and courage. That's what they're looking for. And if they don't find that in us at this critical time, this critical test time, they're never going to come back to church.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're never going to come. And yet if we stand up and speak out and do what we say we believe, then a whole new generation might start showing up.
Yeah.
With us.
You know, one of the things you mentioned in the book is that in the last midterm elections, 370 Republican candidates basically either outright denied the election results of the presidential election in 2020 or cast doubt on it. Do you think that's going to be a winning strategy for Republicans going into this next election other than Donald Trump? And do you think it'll work for Donald Trump?
To be honest, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And we're foolish to think the lies can't win, because they could. So a whole chapter here about John 8. You'll know the truth, says Jesus, and the truth will set you
free.
Free, okay. The opposite of the truth is not lying, it's captivity. Captivity. Truth and freedom are indivisible. And so a whole lot of people out there, particularly white Christians, white evangelicals, but also white mainline Christians, white Catholic Christians, are captive to these lies. So it's not just I want to prove them wrong, I want to help. They need to be set free. How do we set free a captive church, captive people? That's what's at stake here. And so we live in parallel universes now in this country of information, of facts. People don't hear the same things, read the same things. They don't even listen to the same sources. And so how do we, this truth question, to me, is going to be one of the most important ones. How do we, so there's a whole chapter on how do we try to find the truth and search for the truth and listen for the truth and know the truth that can help set us and the people we love, set them free.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things you write in the book is that television news is now the second least trusted source of information. And I wonder what it would take for media to kind of be reformed. Do you have any thoughts about that?
As I said, I'm old now. And after dinner every night, my family watched Walter Cronkite. Only a half hour news, half hour every day, which was nice. only half are news. And he ended by saying, and that's the way it is. And we might not have liked the way it was, and there was bias. Certainly, black America wasn't covered the way it should have been. But most Americans knew that's the way it was, you know. And Walter Cronkite was the most trusted man in America during that time. Now it's the opposite. And so truth-telling is a vocation of journalists. And some of them are really showing courage by trying to exercise their vocation. But it's also the vocation of pastors and priests and deans and bishops I'm meeting all over the country. What does it mean to find the truth? And I think these are big lies. A lot of the folks, back to your first question, who came and marched on the Capitol, they believed the election was stolen.
Yeah.
Now their leaders knew it wasn't stolen, and now those leaders who told people this election, last one, was stolen, where there was no evidence for that, they're trying to steal this election. They have a strategy, intimidation, gerrymandering, voter suppression, and we're actually working as a movement called Faith United to Save Democracy, and I talk about it in the book. And it's a battleground states, 10 states. We're training poll chaplains to be in the polls. I call it lawyers and callers. We got callers with the lawyers, and de-escalation, information, protection, and it's a battle going on, and they're outright trying to steal this next election. And to put it in a strategy in one sentence, and I've been just looking around your city this morning. I've been here often before, and all the cities I was in. The country's demographics are changing, and their strategy, to put it in a sentence, is to prevent changing demography from changing our democracy. They can't fully stop demographic change, but they want to prevent that from changing our democracy. And so that's what we're up against. And we have to believe and show that our many tribes together, our diversity, is the best gift in this country. And for them, it's a threat.
Yeah. You know, I just think of you're right, that, I mean, what's happened to news has just totally changed. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about just how the internet is kind of changing how we relate with each other, you know, how we perceive reality. You know, what is the role of these new technologies in this new place that we find ourselves?
They polarize us. They polarize us. Mm-hmm. And while there are benefits, but democracy is in peril in large part because of the internet. Conspiracy theories, websites, and people say things online they would never say to someone face to face. So, a little story. One of my dear friends, who's our lead pastor in Detroit, in Michigan, for all this stuff, voter protection, he went to Lansing, Michigan, and there was a huge rally of Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and all these white men carrying guns. And he took a clergy friend to his car to keep him safe. And then he saw this crowd in Lansing, thousands of them. And black pastor with a collar walked into the crowd and just started talking to people. Said, "Why are you here?" And I don't know. They just told me to come. And I've been reading all this stuff in social media. Well, but why are you here? I don't know. Do you want me to vote? Do you want my people to be able to vote in Michigan? do you want voter suppression against your black brothers and sisters in Christ in black churches? And they got talking and talking, and this whole crowd around him. And they put down their flag, and they kept talking, and they wanted to be in now regular conversation. That's risky. You're a black man, but he walked in with his collar, and he just started talking to people. You don't need to talk to anybody on the internet. You just attack. So it's really deeply polarizing us, and we have to figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah, when you're wearing a collar and you talk to people like that, which I do all the time. I'm constantly walking up to people in the street. They think you're like a little bit crazy already. So you kind of, it's kind of like an opening to have a conversation that you never might have if you're.
That's true. That's true.
It gives us a chance.
That's true. And I'm now an honorary Jesuit in
right, completely.
Georgetown. And I just wore these turtlenecks all the time.
Yeah, I thought that was. I know you and I look like we're on the same team.
They think I'm a priest. But this is where I think, but in particular, I think we have to challenge white pastors to talk to their congregations and their family and friends, and let's have that conversation. And when they're abusing the Bible, or one of the new ads by this candidate running for president is an ad. He's at a table in a courtroom, defense table, and next to him is an image of Jesus. Sitting next to him at the defense table in the courtroom. And then the language is, I'm being indicted for you. You've got a candidate directly comparing himself to Jesus Christ. Now, rather than just being appalled and let's say, okay, what did Jesus say? What did he do? And you can't claim to be kind of like your new Messiah here and say things that are deliberately, clearly anti-Christ. You can't do it. So let's have a religious conversation. Let's bring the faith factor to bear. Like, for all of you, I don't want you to go away today thinking, finally a good conversation on religion and faith and public life. We got to take this conversation out of here, out of our churches, into the streets of our congregations. We've got to take it out of here and have this conversation. Because this is, as you know so well, the Bible talks about time as chronos time, tick-tock, tick-tock, and then kairos time, a time that changes time, that changes events afterwards for a long time. This is a kairos. This is not a normal election. This isn't Republicans, Democrats, left and right, MSNBC versus Fox. This is a kairos moment.
It is. I've got another question for you, because you live in Washington, D.C., you're around the political people all the time. So what happens if, one of the two candidates gets mortally ill in, say, September or October? Like, what unfolds after that? Like, do the parties just substitute somebody who didn't go through the primary process? Like, what will happen?
Mortally ill, like the political system is?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. So has a major stroke or a heart attack.
People, because I'm in Washington, and people often ask me, what do you predict?
Yeah, I've been trying not to do that.
Yeah, you just did. So what do you predict?
Well, it's not actually, it's like not even a prediction. It's just like, I just don't know.
And the answer is, I don't know.
Okay, good. So neither of us do. We'll find out.
And I can't predict or control politics. But I can make my own choices. I can, walk out in the street with that collar on. I can show up at town meetings and school board meetings and congregational gatherings and talk about what it means to be a follower of Jesus right now. That I can do. I can't calculate, because for one thing, California, for for the presidential election ain't going to count. Washington, D.C., where I live, ain't going to count.
Yeah.
And John Meacham, the great historian, says, democracy only survived over all these years when just enough people do just the right thing.
51%.
In 6 states.
In 6 states.
Right.
Yeah.
So I can't predict how the numbers will turn out for racial grievance. Mm-hmm. But I can say, in Ohio, we just learned there were 6,000 voters taken off the rolls. Surprise, almost all black voters. So black churches now, our whole network there, in church, people now can find out if they're registered to vote or not on Sunday in church. Yeah. Nonpartisan,
great.
Registered to vote.
Right.
They won't learn in November on election day.
Yeah.
They'll learn, hey, my mom's not on the list. Yeah. I better tell her. So we can do things, practical things, and this book is just my 2 cents. That's
I enjoyed it very much. You know, we have a tradition here at the Forum, which you probably remember. We write down questions on cards, and then we read the questions. You know, I'm so pleased just about how well the book is doing. And I've been thinking a lot. You know, we've had a lot of different Forum guests who've been very upset about, you know, the whitewashing of history, and very upset about censorship in libraries and schools. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. I mean, it's you know, if we're not all playing from the same rule book, it's hard to be a unified people. So maybe you can talk a little bit about.
Well, there's a whole section on that in the book about the banning of books, and they want to silence history, and they want to really prevent us looking at the past. But as Brian Stevenson says, and I quote him in the book, you can't go forward unless you deal with the past. Yeah. So, and it's interesting how these white parents, well, if my kid learns about all this history and
they'll feel
slavery, you know, he's going to feel guilty. He's going to feel bad. He's going to feel like he's responsible because he's a white kid. You know, so one of the things that's not in the bio, but my favorite part of my life was I was a Little League baseball coach for 22 seasons. And I had all these players. So when I coached them from 5 to 12, my 2 boys and all their friends. And so when they're like 10 or 12, we got talking about, I talked to the black players and I said, you know, to the white players, you know your teammates here, your teammates and schoolmates, they all have a talk, black players, with their dad or mom about how to behave when a policeman is present. Have any of you had that talk? White kids say, no. All your teammates have, right? And one of the kids would say what happened. And even their white, liberal, progressive DC parents didn't know the talk was happening. Yeah. Happens with every black player I've ever coached. And so my white players, they didn't feel guilty or sorry or their response. They just felt, I'm in a church, but pissed. Yeah. That's what they felt. This is happening to my black teammates and classmates. And it began a conversation about racial justice among 10 and 12-year-olds during baseball practice. That now they're in college and they're still doing systemic racial justice stuff. So I think a new generation of young white students they want to be the new abolitionists of their time. And we're facing a milestone, a Kairos moment in 6 months. But long term, I dedicated the book to my son Luke and Jack and Anna Sophia, my new daughter-in-law, and my students, because they're the ones who are going to really, I think, make a significant difference in this world. But we got to get through this milestone.
Yeah, it's really true. And there's always that swing of the backlash and the forward movement.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here's the first question. How significant are the Seven Mountain Mandate and New Apostolic Reformation?
You guys know about that here, huh? I did a podcast. My podcast called The Soul of a Nation. And a young scholar this new apostolic reformation. 7 mountains. These are the sectors of society. Government, education, media, arts, entertainment, economics, religion, 7 mountains. They want to take over the 7 mountains with these right-wing Christian leaders and groups, and then trickle down the mountains. This is a very scary strategy. It's a takeover. It's a religion takes over and controls a society by force of law, by culture, by all of that. So I think we've got to know what that is, and that's why I did a podcast with this young scholar about what it is. There's a book that he's done about it all. So this strategy is what they have in mind for a takeover of the culture. And somehow that's different than the Jesus being the suffering servant.
Yeah.
He didn't come to take over the culture. He came to change our hearts and our minds. And then we're the ones who change the world because of him.
Yeah, as you're speaking, I think a lot of political experts, political scientists wonder why people of color are part of this movement that involves white Christian nationalism, and I think part of it is being part of those big churches where you do receive that kind of worldview. I just know it from my own cousins and what they hear in their church versus what I learn as a minister and a pastor.
Well, and the changes with Hispanic and black voters, very small number, but still some leaning in that direction. It's mostly black and Hispanic men who are drawn to this charismatic, paternalistic figure.
Yeah.
And my home is the black church, really, in lots of ways. But the prosperity gospel has infiltrated some of those black churches too. The prosperity gospel is a biblical heresy, and it's gotten into so this is a battle going on for the soul of the nation, but also for the soul of the church.
Yeah. Okay, here's one of my questions, or from one of our audience questions. Jim, thank you. Say you're standing on a stranger's door, a captive or a frightened, disengaged voter. What do you say?
Well, I would try and talk about, first of all, we're in a society where people get shot standing outside.
Right.
It's not as easy, door to door isn't as easy as it used to be. But it's got to be about their lives. What's going on in your life, or what about the lives of the people around you, or those people who are different than you? Jesus says they're your neighbors too. So what's going to happen to people's lives?
Yeah.
And it's got to get personal, And I think we were in the Episcopal Cathedral in Los Angeles yesterday or Friday night, and this woman in the front row, young person, said, "A lot of my friends are young, they're saying, why vote? What does it matter? Why vote? The system's corrupt." It's And I said, cynicism and skepticism is used by the powers that be to get us to disengage, to withdraw. They're fueling cynicism.
Yeah, in your book you write that the opposite of faith is cynicism. That cynicism, people don't stop practicing their faith because they cease to believe, but because they become cynical.
Yeah, And cynicism is weaponized by the people, particularly strong men, who want you to become cynical of the whole thing and trust them.
Yeah.
You know, and so this is a spiritual battle going on, and we can't see it in polling terms or political terms. Yeah. So it's a battle which we have to be engaged, and we can get cynical. There's a part of the left that's the problem politically, where they're just so mad at everything, they're just attacking each other all the time. Not woke enough, not progressive enough, not like me. They're not even talking to anybody, but it's like cynicism and withdrawal in my world. There's cancel cultures on all sides.
Yeah.
And so that is what's going to kill us. So how do you get people to talk about their lives and understand their neighbors' lives and what's going to happen? And to be blunt and honest, there are a lot of white, liberal, progressive types who, if the election goes the way toward this right-wing Christian, they're going to be okay. In fact, some of the tax policies might help them. They're going to be okay. But the impact will be on marginal people, poor people, vulnerable people. And that's what we have to keep in mind.
I also just think just like the general psychology of the country. I mean, I just remember during the first Trump administration just how destructive it was for people who are just on the margins, just in terms of their mental health.
Yeah.
So there is that element too of just living in a more paranoid, more suspicious society. Here's another question. It's it's deep versus LR, curious versus judgmental, vulnerable versus defensive. Is there a way to engender these values in the public sphere? You're welcome to look at it if you want to have it like
everything is so polarized. It's all about who's right and who's wrong. And empathy is something that is just missing in our culture right now. And yet empathy is the key to being able to move forward with different people in tribes, trying to find a way to do this together. I'll say more upstairs about this, but the lectionary today is Jesus' resurrection is appearing to the disciples, and they're full of all our stuff: hate, despair, conflict,
guilt,
nervous. And he says, peace be unto you. And so we'll talk upstairs about what he means by that peace.
Very nice.
What he means by that peace. And we're stuck. We're feeling a lot of what they felt. Guilt, despair, hopelessness around the country. And I'm going to end today with hope, because around the country here, I feel so helpless and hopeless. Well, that's the key. Hope is going to be the key. And that's what the faith community, that's what we're supposed to provide.
Yeah.
That's our job, to talk about what hope means at the moment.
Yeah. So while you've been on tour, what have been some of the, what has been the passage or an example of seeing or getting it? So who have you seen and met on the tour that has helped you understand the situation even more deeply?
Well, we've had a lot of young people coming, which is great. Older people buy books. So some today will buy books too, which is great. But I was telling Ken and Beverly this morning, my niece came to the event in Grand Rapids where Ken and Bev and I were. We had 500 people in Grand Rapids.
Wow. Yeah.
For the event, big church, all packed, and this niece of this daughter of this relative of mine, not from our religious family, but she's 9 years old, and she came, and her sister at 12 came, and they talked about it all the way home.
Wow.
And then he took picked up his daughter at school the other day, and her teacher said, she's talking about this event where her grandfather helped plan it. My brother, her dad was in it, and her uncle was in it, and it was really cool. And she said, why was it cool? She said, well, he's an activist. He's an activist. She's 9.
Yeah.
And what kind of activist? And she said, the 9-year-old, Maya, good question. What kind of activist? He's a God activist.
That's great.
So how do we be God activists in this time? How do we raise what we say we believe? Yeah. We can't predict or control, but if we're silent or disengaged, the worst is going to happen.
Yeah. I'm going to put my glasses on for this one because the handwriting's a little bit smaller than the other. Okay.
You have that issue too, huh?
All of a sudden, when you came last time, I was doing just fine. COVID gave me bad eyesight. Has true democracy ever existed in the U.S.?
No. Be blunt. But we're closer than ever before to becoming the most genuinely multiracial democracy in the world. That's what we're close to. And that's why we're having the battle. Because what I call America's original sin is fighting for its life by any means necessary. And because we're so close to accomplishing this, they're battling back. Yeah. And so this is a moment when, am I happy with democracy as it is? No. We're not a majoritarian democracy. Most countries that have democracy, whoever wins the most votes wins the election. Not here. Why is it 6 battleground states? What is this electoral college? But Eddie Glaude, who wrote the foreword to this book, I love Eddie Glaude.
Yeah, me too. He's a great guy.
He said, I quote him in the book, everything is collapsing and everything is possible at the same time. I feel that. I feel like things are collapsing and they could really collapse and put us in a terrible place. Or it could change things more deeply. If we win this battle over democracy in the fall, and I've got a whole lot of Republican friends who want to win this battle against these forces in their party. But we could see change like we haven't seen for a long time.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't want to preserve democracy as it has been. That's not enough. And a new generation says, I don't want that. So this could cause some changes, open up some things. Kairos, right? That we haven't seen before.
Yeah, I think California was in a similar situation in the 1990s where we were seeing race-based politics and we were seeing a new electorate, and it emerged, and you're right, we may be at the dawn of something really great. So here's another question. Now with demographic war a given, how do we confront misogyny, ageism, etc. as well?
Well, back to a text. So I went to the Galatians text, 3:28. No longer Jew or Gentile, bond or free, male or female. These are the basic pillars of division in our society. Race, class, and gender, disability fits in there, age, all that. And they're saying, in Christ, we overcome these. Now, what I learned was that this text was a baptismal formula in the early church. A baptismal rite. They read that text at every baptism. And baptism is what? Going public, right? Yeah. So here's this crowd, and they're saying, so this brown-skinned Palestinian rabbi that we follow told us, instructed us to overcome these barriers and divisions. So that's what we do. Now, we're not perfect, we make mistakes, but that's our vocation. That's part of our vocation. It's not just extracurricular. Here's what we do. So if you don't want to be a part of a group that's trying to overcome those barriers, you better go somewhere else, because we're not the group for you. That's what they were saying. Imagine if American churches were reading that Galatians text at all our baptisms today. And by the way, guess what was one of the texts taken out of all the slaveholder Bibles?
Oh, yeah.
Galatians
exactly.
3:28.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so here's another question. We're running out of time. I just want to make sure you have enough time to be prepared for the sermon. What does public, empathetic disagreement look like?
Well, democracy is supposed to be disagreements.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want one side to balances of power politically is a good thing. We need, though, a theology of democracy, a spirituality of democracy. And how do we have genuine, legitimate disagreements, but we're disagreeing with our neighbors, not making them into enemies? And if they're enemies, what does Jesus say about that?
Right.
We're to love our enemies too. So we could, that Good Samaritan text could help us point the way to multiracial democracy. So we're not saying don't disagree, have a conversation. Let's get down. One-sidedness doesn't normally have the answers to problems. And I don't find all the solutions on the left, nor do I find and the right's been taken over by this not just disagreement, is if you disagree, you're out.
Yeah.
You know. So having that, what if we could get a real dialogue going again, not just vote counting, but how do we deal with problems that are very difficult to resolve? These aren't easy issues.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have time today, but I'm sure you talk about this all the time. Unhoused people on the street, so many on the West Coast, it raises all kinds of issues that are complicated and have to be resolved.
Yeah.
And what if young people were walking by our churches and said, you know, I don't know that I believe everything they believe in that building, but that's where we have our town meetings about gun violence, about homelessness. Mm-hmm. That's where we discuss how we're going to solve these problems. Wouldn't it be wonderful if our congregations were those kind of town meeting places where we help people learn how to disagree and find better solutions?
Yeah, it's so true. You know, Jim, I'm so grateful that you came all the way out. I know it was a long tour, but I'm glad you made it here.
I did.
We were looking forward to your visit very much, and I think you gave us a lot of signs of hope. This is a Kairos moment, and I do feel that sense of hope, that sense of possibility. I mean, it's just God's the one who's got us in his hands, and we're just doing our best to respond to Jesus' inviting message. Next week, following Choral Eucharist, leaders from Brady, California will meet in the chapter room to talk about gun violence, exactly what you just described, Brady's life-saving programs, and what you can do to make America and your own neighborhood safer. And please join me on April 28th when my forum guest will be the poet and Black feminist scholar Tanya Monique Foster. Her writing and research focus on ideas of place and emplacement and on intersections between the visual and the written. Yeah. We're going to be talking about poetry as memory and poetry as prayer. You're welcome to join us for the Eucharist afterwards, where Jim's going to be preaching at 11 today.
Two things. I will sign your books back there, but I want the book to be used as a tool.
Yeah.
A tool. How to persuade people, how to get a public conversation, how to have these. We're going to turn into book tour and the town meetings across the country. It's tour.
Yeah.
And my longtime partner and friend Ken Miedema and Beverly Vandermolen here are with me tonight, and we do these road shows.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to introduce them.
Well, Ken Miedema is maybe the best improvisational musician that musicians I know have ever seen.
You mentioned him in the book, too. You mentioned Ken in the book, too.
He's in the book. So we go back and forth around the country, and he's offered to come today, and he's actually written a song for the book. And I want to end with Ken this morning, and I'll go back to that table.
Perfect. And then Rebecca will bring you up in time to preach.
Great.
Thank you, everybody, for being here for the forum, and thank you, Jim.
Every significant movement throughout history has always had the arts as a part of it. And so I am one of many people who are wanting to make artistic contributions to this movement, and Jim and I have been friends forever. And we're hoping to do a lot of work together on the road. This song is called A Faith for Our Time. I want to see a faith that smells and sounds like welcome, where people meet beyond the walls of race and clan and creed. I want to see a faith where mercy grows like gardens, hope and health meet hand in hand, and loving takes the lead. I want to see a faith come alive in every culture, speaking peace in every language, hope in every tongue. Alive with conversation, connection, and communion. Words of love are spoken here, and songs of love are sung. I want to see the real thing. I want to see the big deal. I want to see the God life that can turn a soul around. I want to feel the Spirit. I want to hear the music. I want to feel the God power that can bring the barriers down. I don't want to see another institution worshiping Christian nationalism with pretty songs to sing. What I want to see is a love-born revolution. What I want to see is the real thing. I want to see a faith helps me find that Jesus way. Put my feet on that narrow road he spoke of long ago. I want to see a faith where people lift each other up to make the choices and the changes that will help our spirits grow. I want to see a faith where everybody matters. Everyone, no matter who, has special gifts to give. I want to see a faith helps me find my place of service. We give, receive, belong, believe, and that is how we live. I want to see a faith. I want to see a faith. I want to see a faith when neighbors care for neighbors, caring for that image of God that's alive in everyone. I want to see a faith that lives for peace and not for war. No matter what compassion costs, we run to get it done. I want to see a faith where no one ever goes without. I want to see a faith that breaks those barriers down. I want to see the real thing. I want to see the big deal. I want to see the God life that can turn a soul around. I want to feel the Spirit. I want to hear the music. I want to see the God power that can break the barriers down. I don't want to see one more institution worshiping Christian nationalism with pretty songs to sing. What I want to see is a love-born revolution. What I want to see is the real thing.
Amen.
See you up there.
Okay.